Hi, podcast listeners. Welcome to the A World of Difference podcast. We have so many guests on this show making a difference in our lives, making a difference all around the world with the expertise that they bring. And yet so many of you are reaching out to me saying, you want more. It's not enough just what we're putting on these podcast episodes for you. And so I am here to extend a very warm welcome to you to our Difference Maker community, where you can join for as little as $5 a month to get all this extra content. Out the gate, you're going to get 30 plus minisodes of exclusive content not available for the regular podcast listeners, and an exclusive minisode every month. And you'll get exclusive voting power to help us pick podcast topics and more. And that's at our Changers tier. There's 3 different main tiers and then an extra larger tier. But whatever tier that you join at, you will be included in this extra content. And I know that many of you are wanting to go a little bit deeper. And so even though it gets a little wild in there sometimes because of how deep we go, I want you to join us there. This extra content is very special. It means a great deal to me to be a part of this community with you. And I would love to just exchange ideas or perspectives that you have around these different episodes. And that's the place where we do it. So please show up to our Difference Maker community. Give us $5 out of your pocket every month. And I think that you'll have a lot of fun in there because we do. And I would love for you to join us. So go to patreon.com/A World of Difference to join us there. Welcome to the A World of Difference podcast. I'm Lori Adams Brown, and this is a podcast for those who are different and want to make a difference. Our guest on today's show is Karen Gonzalez. Yes, she's back with a new book called Beyond Welcome. Karen is a speaker, writer, storyteller, and immigrant advocate who herself immigrated from Guatemala to the United States as a child. Karen is a former public school teacher and attended Fuller Theological Seminary, where she studied theology and missiology. The last 15 years, she's been a nonprofit professional. Last time we had her on our show to talk about her book, The God Who Sees, and Karen's second book, Beyond Welcome, Centering Immigrants and Our Christian Response to Immigration, just released. She also has bylines in Sojourners, Christianity Today, The Christian Century, and others. She's the co-host of the Latina-focused podcast Cafe with Comrades, and she lives in Baltimore, Maryland, with her cat, Oscar. It is an honor and a privilege and so joyous to have the one and only Karen Gonzalez back on the show to talk about immigration, her new book, and what we've been missing. Her voice in this conversation is so informed from so many levels, and I'm super excited to have her on today to talk about her latest book. Get your ears ready, your hearts and your minds open for Karen Gonzalez. Karen, to the A World of Difference podcast.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me back, Lori. It's good to see you again.
It's great to see you too. We're recording this on Election Day, and it's kind of wild here in California. I can only imagine in the Maryland, D.C. area here in the U.S. what that's feeling like today. So, yeah, how are you coming into this interview today? What are you feeling?
I feel apprehensive. It's, I'm sitting with, when I was researching my first book, I ran across this quote by Dr. King when he says, "While it's true that laws do not change hearts, they can restrain the heartless." And I don't know. It just seems like we're always trying to minimize harm instead of making real effective change, So sitting with that, but also knowing that it's important to participate and to throw everything at corrupt systems and broken leaders.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And, there is obviously, we always say how polarized it is in America and the two-party system and all of it. It's like, it's this or that. And it just pits us against each other. And, Twitter has been taken over by Elon Musk and nobody even knows what's happening anymore. But some things remain true and timeless, which is, I always feel like listening to each other's perspectives can help us grow and maybe understand an angle we hadn't seen before. And so I'm certainly glad you're here today with your story, that everybody that heard your story on the podcast before But you've even grown and learned more since then. So I'm excited to have you on and talk about this new book. Let's first ask that question: why this new book, and what are you hoping for it to do?
Sure, that's a great question. Well, I never set out to write two books on this topic. I really didn't. But as I went around speaking to a lot of different groups about the first book I wrote, The God Who Sees, I just knew that there was more content because a lot of people seem to believe, and this is particularly in progressive and mainline Protestant spaces, they seem to believe, like, oh, if I already welcome immigrants, then I'm done. I don't have to check into this conversation anymore.
Mm,
And for me, that's just the very beginning
yeah.
of the conversation. And I wanted people to consider that, yes, the entry point is hospitality, but then we think about things like solidarity and kinship and advocacy together. But these are places we never get to because we never grow past the very beginning. And so that's really where this book was born. Wasn't thinking about all of that. And it's definitely a book that is for people who already care and already welcome. This is not a 101 entry into the conversation. And so, um, in that sense, I guess it's like Luke Acts, right? Part one and part two.
Yeah.
So,
So good. Yeah. Being here in California, we're getting immigrants and refugees of all different nationalities all the time. Afghans in particular here in what is called Little Kabul and Fremont, and the work my husband does. And I volunteer a bit with him. And it can get overwhelming sometimes to see all the needs, even when you are doing your best to welcome, because every family that comes in, you always hear their story. And it's like, like one family I remember sitting in their living room and, she has a science degree and had dreams of working in her country, of course. And for a woman in Afghanistan, that was a big deal. And her husband, an engineer. And, they start off like working at an Indian restaurant, or some people drive Lyft or Uber. And our systems are just not kind at all. And so voting is huge. But there's other ways people can be involved, like with business and hiring people and schools and all the systems. So, what are some ways that you advise people to help tackle these systems, as a citizen, as a Christian, as a person of faith?
yeah. So, well, first of all, what you said, the voting is really, really important. People don't realize that refugees, even though they come to the US with the legal right to permanent residency, they are not citizens when they arrive. And it's still about a 5, 6 year process before
Yeah.
they can do that. So your voting really is important for those people who cannot yet vote, and to vote for policies that are welcoming and inclusive of all people, especially at a time when there's so much Christian nationalism and xenophobia. It's really critical that those of us who do not believe in those things really make our voices heard and known. So that's really important. But there's other things as well. And one of the things I always encourage people to do is to really sit with the Holy Spirit and really find out, what is it I really believe about immigration? It's a huge issue politically, socially, economically, but it's also a biblical issue. And where do my views about this come from? Do they really come from the Bible and the teachings of Jesus, or do they really come from my family or the media or my peer group or what have you? Because before we engage people, we really need to be sure that we know where we're coming from on this. And so that's the first thing I always encourage people to do. And then from there, there's a variety of ways to get involved. So some of the work that your husband does with refugee resettlement always needs volunteers, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's language partners or people who are, cultural partners. So if you think about something as simple as a parent teacher conference, well, we know what to do because we live here. And think about somebody coming into this environment brand new and not really knowing what you do at a parent-teacher conference. And so this is something that cultural partners can do. And some organizations are called like a good neighbor team. They help newly arrived refugees sort of navigate a lot of the things that culturally we just know because we live here, but that would be surprising to somebody who's new. Even think about something like personal space. You know, in the US, even if you're riding public transportation, you don't smush up against people
Right.
because that's not okay, right? But in
Right.
many countries, that's perfectly fine, you
Yeah.
know? I just remember when I taught refugee students and I taught English, they would ask me, why do people say excuse me when they walk near me? They didn't touch me, but they say excuse me. And something that simple is important to know, or that you don't drop in on Americans, that you have to make an appointment. You can't just show up at people's houses. All these kinds of things are extremely important to help to navigate life here well and to understand what's happening. And you don't learn it from watching TV or from just observing. It really helps to have a cultural insider
Yeah.
come with you and talk to you about some of these things. So language partner is another thing that people can do, is helping people to learn the language if their country of origin was not an English speaking country. And then, of course, people can give to things like legal funds. So people may not know this, but the immigration process is really expensive.
Yeah.
To get a green card, it's over $1,000 to apply for one. And this is something all immigrants and refugees have to do. And as you noted, most of them start at the very bottom. You know, you're driving Uber or Lyft, or you're working in warehouses or factories. You're not earning a lot of money, and to all of a sudden have to shell out $1,000 per person
Yeah.
for a green card application is really expensive. So anybody, any nonprofit that does legal services for immigrants and refugees is really important as well, to be able to give to those kinds of funds. There's also detention visitation. So, you know, anybody can do detention visitation. And it doesn't even matter if you don't speak another language, because there's people from English speaking countries, the Caribbean, African countries, and they're in detention. And I don't know if people understand the way detention works, but you don't get picked up, for example, in Maryland and get put in a detention center in Maryland necessarily.
Yeah.
You could get picked up in Maryland and get put in a detention center in Florida. When I was doing detention visitation before the pandemic started, I just remember meeting with people from all over the country, and they got shipped to Maryland for detention. So literally, they don't know anyone and they're in detention. And so that is also an important ministry, the sitting with people in prison, the way that Jesus
Mhm.
talks about in Matthew chapter 25. So those are some different ways that people can engage. Of course, there's always advocacy. Calling legislators and representatives is important. And then having conversations with people in your life about these things, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. And it's unfortunate, right? We live in this age of information, but also misinformation,
Yeah.
because anyone can put anything out there. And so it's really important when you hear people say things that you speak up. You don't have to be harsh or rude or obnoxious or anything about it. But, you know, I was at a coffee shop where, you know, I was just writing and working, and I had a book on immigration on the table. And it's interesting because this couple near me said, "Oh, you know, what are you reading? What is this about?" And I started talking to them, and the first thing they said was, "Well, we don't believe in open borders." So they go to the most extreme position
Right.
all of a sudden, you
Okay.
know.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Okay, neither do any immigration advocates that I know."
Right. Yeah.
I said, "That's a really extreme position."
Yeah.
I said, "Most people are not advocating for that. They're just advocating for policy reform."
Hmm.
And so these are some of the changes that people want. And, we had this nice little conversation, and it wasn't, it was very pleasant. It wasn't contentious. And so it is important to spread good information where you can, or to direct people. I
Mm-hmm.
always tell people you can always check out the American Immigration Council. They have a really great website, and it's very accessible to anyone. Anything you want to know. What is the DREAM Act? You can put it in there and it'll pop up, and it'll give you a short little article about what it is. If you want to know the difference between a refugee and an asylum seeker, you can put it in there and it'll pop up another little article. And so it's important not to go to the news sources we're familiar with, the
Yeah.
Fox News, even the CNN or NPR. It's important to go to places. So these are nonpartisan think tanks that all they do is research immigration policy in the United States. And so the American Immigration Policy Council, the National Immigration Forum is another one, the Cato Institute, which is libertarian, but they do have a really great section on immigration that is surprisingly positive, believe it or not.
Wow.
so so these are some good places to go to for information, and to correct people. Don't share memes, even if they're positive, unless
Mm-hmm.
you know that they're true,
Yeah.
because they don't help the conversation if they're rude or harsh. And if they're false, they're contributing to the disinformation that exists out there.
Mm. Yeah. And that kind of psychology of a meme being passed around, in the same way that we sort of generally, I think, in the United States, understand that advertisers may or may not be giving us all the correct information, like when they're trying to sell you whatever product that you see either on TV or on your phone or on a billboard. Like, they're trying to use human psychology, even prey on your natural human longings to get you to desire that thing. And so it may not be a straight out lie, although on occasion I think that happens, but they might mix a little bit of truth with a lot of false narrative, maybe an overpromise, underdeliver or something. So memes can have that same effect. Yeah, I'd like to unpack that a little bit more with you in terms of like how the psychology of what we're seeing in the social media or even the media itself can feed us stereotypes that really cause harm to immigrants, refugees, people coming to the shores of our nations.
Yeah, so it's interesting when Hillary Clinton ran for president against Donald Trump. I saw this meme that was even shared by some of my relatives, who have this philosophy of shut the door behind me. I'm the last good immigrant that arrived. And they posted something about, if Hillary Clinton wants illegal immigrants here, then let's just drop them off at her house and they can live with her. And I saw this meme shared really widely by conservative people who are against immigration, and as well as Christians, by the way,
Mm-hmm.
included in that. So fast forward, Donald Trump is not president anymore, even though he won that election. And we have the governors of Texas and Florida
Yeah.
literally busing and flying immigrants and dropping them off in front of the home of Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
We have people attacking the home of Nancy Pelosi,
Yeah.
all over these policies that they don't like. And this meme turned into this really, it contributed to this really destructive force
Mm.
and into human beings like immigrants being turned into pawns instead of being treated with the dignity their humanity deserves.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with the idea of other states that are not along the borderlands should share in the responsibility of caring for people in vulnerable situations. I am not against that at all.
Mm-hmm.
However, there's a correct way to do that,
Yeah.
like making arrangements, giving people a heads up so that state agencies and nonprofits are prepared. You can't just drop off people in the middle of Martha's Vineyard and leave. and
Yeah.
just leave them there to fend for themselves, and then score political points with your supporters over something like that. And so this is some of the harm that's happening. And people don't realize that doing something like that is not only harmful in terms of not respecting the humanity of these people who are asylum seekers, but also it jeopardizes their legal cases. They were paroled in and they have a legal case, probably in Florida or Texas,
Mm-hmm.
in that federal court. And now they're in Massachusetts. And
Yeah.
how are they supposed to show up for their court dates
Yeah.
and continue with their case? And so it's harmful on a number of levels. And so I thought it was really interesting because I thought it was just a stupid meme. And, I commented to my uncle, this isn't true. This
Mm-hmm.
is not what she's advocating for. She didn't even become president anyway. So it was a moot point. But
Yeah.
just the fact that this was going around, and then what it turned into, people, believe it or not, actually believe memes.
They do.
They're not just silly to people,
Mm-hmm.
especially when they're political in nature.
Mm-hmm.
People really believe them. They're easy, they're catchy, usually have pictures. And so it's accessible information,
Mm-hmm.
even though it's not good information, right? It's not true. It's easy enough. And so I don't share memes, whether they're negative or positive, just for that reason. Ones of a political nature are just not helpful to the conversation. And what they do, of course, is they normally go to the opposite extremes instead of the conversation that's actually on the table.
Yeah.
So when I tell people, well, this is what immigration advocates are advocating for. What they want Congress to do is to, one, they want Congress to pass the DREAM Act. So all of these children, people who were brought to the U.S. as children and who have grown up here and went to college and are contributing to the country, 3/4 of the country supports them having a legal pathway to citizenship. But our legislators haven't had the will to pass this DREAM Act.
Yeah.
And so one of the things immigration advocates want is to pass the DREAM Act. It's been up so many times and it has not passed. Two, we have a lot of labor needs in this country. I don't know if you've noticed, but especially in service industries, factories, cafes, all kinds of different places,
Yeah.
there's a lot of jobs available and not
Mm-hmm.
enough American workers.
Yeah.
And so part of what they want is to make it easier to come into the US, to work legally,
Mm-hmm.
to provide things like work permits so that people are not exploited,
Yep.
but also so that our labor needs are met.
Yeah.
So there's complementary benefits there, right? For everybody wins in this kind of situation. They also want to create a workplace authorization system that's enforceable for everyone. So people may not know this, but in places where you receive government grants, they do something called electronic verification.
Mm.
So when you start work there and you produce your documents, right, in your first day, they send this electronic communication to the government, and the government comes back and says, yes, Lori Adams Brown has the legal right to work in the US.
Yeah.
And that's great, right? Because that's a system that should work for everyone. However, employers get to opt in or out of that.
Oh.
And I don't think that that's a good situation, because what you have then is a lot of industries who don't receive government funding, so they're not required to use the electronic verification system. They just opt out. And so then you have them hiring a lot of workers who don't have the legal right to work in the US. And then sometimes they exploit them.
Yeah.
Sometimes they don't, but they still are employing them. And if they get caught, which would only happen if there was some kind of audit, that would happen, and which very rarely happens. But if they got caught, there isn't even any real punishment. It's a slap on the wrist.
Wow.
And you get to go on about your day. So there's no punishment for employers who hire people. So if our government is really serious about this, shouldn't there be real enforcement? Shouldn't everybody do electronic verification?
Mm.
So that's another thing that immigration advocates want. And then finally, they want to provide a pathway to citizenship for the people that are here. And it includes things like passing a background check.
Mm-hmm.
It includes things like proving that you pay taxes and things like paying a fine for having been in the country illegally. And then being able to enter into a process where you can become a naturalized citizen. That's what it is. It's nothing extreme. It's nothing like open borders that people think of. It's very reasonable and
Mm-hmm.
practical. And it's something that they have come up with because they want both sides to be able to agree on it. But so far, again, our leaders have not had the will to pass any kind of immigration policy reform. And so that becomes the difficulty. And that's why calling your legislators is really important.
Yeah.
People who are against immigration, they call. Believe me, they call. And so calling is really important. It's more effective than writing letters or emails because when you call your legislator, an actual person answers the phone. It's not a system where you leave a message. It's an actual staffer from that senator or representative. And you actually speak to someone, you give them your name, your address, and you say, whatever your concern is. I really want Senator X to vote for the DREAM Act. I'm in support of this. Most of the country is. I want our country to continue to be a welcoming place for refugees and other immigrants. They will write all that down. And I know it sounds like, what good would that do? But believe me, it does a lot of good hearing from an actual person.
Yeah.
So don't get me wrong, signing petitions, letters, all of that is good too. We need to throw everything we can
Yeah.
at systems that are broken and unjust. And so
Mm-hmm.
whatever you can do, do it. But calls are very effective. So yeah, so that's some of the challenge, I think, with things like memes and
Yeah, definitely. And I think, for US citizens, even if you live abroad, there's ways to still make those phone calls. I know the time can be hard and you can use, like, I don't know, Google Voice number or something like that. But that really that's what I hear pretty regularly from whether it's trying to pass the ERA and different things that are going on that we care about. It seems though so often, unfortunately, it's the ones who are most affected by the system being broken that ends up being the ones who do so much of the work. But I think that a conversation that would be really helpful is the privilege of citizenship that we already have, and not just resting comfortably because, well, you know what, it's fine for me. I'm legal here. I don't have to worry about Border Patrol when I go past that near El Paso, and I don't have to worry that my voice doesn't matter on election day today. But considering people of faith, whatever your faith background is, but I would say in particular, the commands in Christianity to love our neighbor includes loving them enough to help the systems be better. And so I would love a little more practical, actionable step from you that we could even link in the show notes if somebody was going to call their legislator in the U.S. Um, are there talking points? Is there a little script that they could find online? I'm sure there's all kinds of resources. Where would you point them to?
definitely. And I can send you links to all of that. A lot of the nonprofit groups, particularly the Catholic ones, have a lot of little scripts that you can use to call and you can adapt it to your style. And if you're overseas and calling is hard, letters and emails are still good. They still, if as long as they're personal, they're not form, they're your email that you're writing
Yeah.
and you ask for a response, those can be very effective too. So don't feel intimidated if the phone scares you or you don't want to find, a time to be able to call the East Coast. So all of those things are effective. But yes, I can send you a script. Even saying something as simple as, "Hi, I live in Senator X's district and or state, and I would like to know how they are voting on the DREAM Act. how they are voting on the Afghan Adjustment Act. All of that, you can just call and say, I want to know what their position is on that. And if they support it, that campaign, that person who works in the staff in the office will happily tell you, well, Senator X supports the Afghan Adjustment Act and has voted for it, you know. And if they don't, they'll start to dance around. And then you don't have to have a script. You can say, well, I support this. You know, Afghans helped our US military. They supported us. They translated for us. We destabilized their country and made it unsafe for them to stay there. And I support the DREAM Act, and I want to hear from Senator X about this. You know, something like that is very, very effective. So if you're not sure and you want to know, you know, I don't even know how my senator or how my representative voted on this, you can just call and ask, and they have to tell you. And again, they'll dance around
Yeah.
if they didn't support it. And then you can say, well, you know, that's not okay. I live in his district or her district, or I live in that state. And I'm going to remember this the next time this person comes up for reelection. All of those things are important. And I'm going to talk to my friends about it.
Yeah.
All those things are important things to say. And they do matter.
Mm.
So, yeah, I mean, you know, here in the DC area, so many Afghans are on the verge of falling into homelessness
Yeah.
because of they don't have status. They were brought in under this very temporary kind of permission to come into the U.S. It's expiring. There is no Afghan Adjustment Act yet. They're in crisis.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, and they can't vote. They can't call,
No.
right?
Yeah.
But here's one way that you can help them and protect them. And I don't think people realize that not caring for Afghans is extremely bad for the country, not just on a humanitarian level, but it's going to be so bad for the US military if there's other conflicts in the world, as there surely will be, and people are aware, well, the US doesn't keep its promises. They're going to tell you that they'll help you, but they won't. They're going to tell you that they'll give you a visa, but then they won't support you.
Yeah.
So,
No, I mean, it's morally wrong. I mean, you just think about the decision. People had just hours to decide they were going to leave their nation last year in August or whatever, when everything was just all of a sudden just crashing down in Kabul. And, you know, people were even afraid to get to the airport. There was like the bomb at the airport, like later, the amount of trauma they carry from leaving their country last minute, packing just a backpack, going, several of them get stationed like in Frankfurt and then Dubai, and then they eventually get here and they're in like El Paso and different detention centers, and then they finally end up in the Bay Area. And the amount of trauma they're carrying just from that process is hard. Even, you know, meals may just be a couple times a day, and they have little kids, and you know, it's just, there's so much trauma they're carrying, and for us to not have systems that help them when so many of them have so much to contribute here in our nation. I mean, there are
mhm.
some good businesses around here. I mean, there's, you know, I can think of a coffee shop that hires people, and I can think like a business that I've worked in this year where they're actively seeking out how to help in that system, like what they can personally do as a small business owner. But in addition, there's macro systems of our government where we can be involved in all those things, to help people. I totally agree with you. And I mean, especially on my heart are the Venezuelans that are coming. You know, the whole Martha's Vineyard, a lot of those were Venezuelans. And when I was in DC in September, it was all in the news that the governor of Texas was busing them to the DC area. And my heart breaks because I know Venezuelans and I keep up with my Venezuelan friends there. And some are trying to get here, even like a couple weeks ago, that I found out about. And it's because they're desperate. Like they can't send their little girls to school anymore. College educated people, business owners who've done very well. And these are desperate people who come here. And the very least we could do is have our systems, you know, be better for them. So I'd love your response to that, of what we can do as citizens, how we can use that privilege. I know your family has your own story too. And yeah, what are some more ways we can show more compassion as we work on systems.
Yeah. And I think another way is just the whole idea of thinking of ourselves as hosts versus guests. This is one of the things I challenge in the book because if you think about it, like when somebody comes to my house as a guest, they're aware that it's my house,
Yeah.
that they don't live here, right? They can't just put their feet up and relax, right? Because it isn't their home. And usually people who are guests on their best behavior because they know this isn't their home. So the whole idea of host, guest, I really challenge a lot of the language that we use, even something that sounds as benign as, we welcome refugees. There's a subject in that phrase. It's
Mm.
we,
Yeah.
the host, right? And then there's an object, and it's the refugees. And so I think moving from that away from that kind of language, and moving into language that more expresses our shared humanity. So I like the word neighbors because neighbors are neighbors. They belong there too.
Yeah.
Um, they're just not in your home, right? But they belong in the neighborhood. And so I appreciate that kind of language or thinking through ways that we can make people feel like you are home now. This is now your home. It is my home. It is your home as
Mm.
well. Um, and, I see this in the life of Jesus. In his life, so many people showed him hospitality. We know that there were multiple women who supported his public ministry, who
Yeah.
gave him money to live, because we know he says he had no home, no place to lay his head, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there were a lot of people who hosted him for meals
Mm-hmm.
in their homes, and he received this hospitality. And then he says, when he, on the night before um, he is arrested and then crucified, he says to his disciples, I'm going to go and I'm going to prepare a place for you, so that where I am, you may be also. My Father's house has many rooms, right? And I'll prepare a place for you. So, this whole idea of he received so much hospitality, and now he was going to be the giver of hospitality. He was going to be the one receiving
Mm.
them. And so there was this very much mutuality in the hospitality. We know that Jesus had a lot to give, but it wasn't materially, right? He wasn't wealthy that he could give people money. But he listened to people, he engaged with them, especially those on the margins that everyone else ignored.
Yeah.
Um, he had this kind of hospitality of heart with
Mm.
people. And yet we often treat refugees and other immigrants as if they have less in every way,
Yeah.
not just materially. We treat them as if they don't have gifts and culture and talents and faith, all of these different things that they bring as image bearers of God. We just treat them as if they're people who are just leeching off of us and the country.
Yeah.
And first of all, that's not true. But our language sort of reflects this idea of them having less in every way. Instead of, oh, yes, these are image bearers of God. They have a lot to offer. And in the short term, they have these needs because they've come from trauma, as you said, because
Mm-hmm.
they've, sought refuge here because their country was taken over, in this case by the Taliban, right? So I often see this play out in the way that decisions are made on behalf of people who are refugees and immigrants. Instead of asking them what they would like, um, programs are just created for them and they're not asked if this is what they want. Decisions are made for them about where they're going to live and what they're going to do, without really talking to them and finding out Is this a good fit? Is this the best place for you? Even the way that people are just placed randomly in the country
Yeah.
without being asked, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a broader conversation, but there's so much that happens that I see, even in the way that people are regarded instead of. So I've seen this work out in really good ways. Like there's a church here in Baltimore who used to be like a white Lutheran church,
Mm-hmm.
all European immigrants. And then over the years, the neighborhood shifted. And now it's a mostly Central American neighborhood,
Oh.
mostly people from El Salvador and Honduras. And it's really interesting because this church wanted to know during the pandemic what they could do to serve the families in the neighborhood. And instead of assuming, they were going to start, they were thinking about things like food drives and all these different things. They just decided to ask the families, what would be the best way that we could support you and
Mm-hmm.
your family through this time? We have some resources. And the families said, I would love for you to provide a space with Wi Fi for my child to do their schooling.
Mm-hmm.
And so the church, instead of investing all this money on something the parents didn't want and weren't asking for, they went ahead and provided space, provided Wi-Fi for their kids and a safe space with an adult, supervising. But I've been in other communities, for example, where they just made a decision. Oh, this community needs a community garden, so we're just going to start a garden for the community. People who work in physical labor all week, they don't really want a community garden. That's not
Right.
something that they're looking for. So what
Right.
ended up happening is that all basically the community garden was for white people in the community who worked white collar jobs, right?
Right.
And had a desire to grow their own food. And it never became a place that was for the community. But again, they were never asked what they wanted. They were
Mm-hmm.
just given this thing. So that's an example of the way that it plays out. We think we know better. We have resources and education and all of these things, but we're not respecting people's dignity and choices if we're not allowing them to
Yeah.
be the ones to say what they want or even to give feedback on resettlement. They
Mm.
can give feedback and say this really didn't work. And that's also a really good thing. So um, I think that is an area that's a little more nuanced, but it's an important thing for us to think about because the way that we diminish people's humanity, it doesn't happen in big ways. We would never say, well, I don't think those people are human, right?
Right.
But it's all in the way that we interact with them and treat them,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so that's what I wanted to get at is how do we tackle those more nuanced conversations so that everything that we're doing says, no, you are a full human being and you have gifts and talents. And, my dad used to say when I was growing up, just because I speak with an accent doesn't mean I think with an accent. Because he had an accent, people would treat him as if he wasn't smart.
Right.
And so this is something that we also do with people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, there's a lot of different ways that we can engage with people on a personal level as well to show that we really respect their dignity as human beings.
So good. So good. Just the basic community development principles of asking the community what they need. And sometimes that gets lost here in the United States with the refugee resettlement. So this is a good reminder for everybody doing this work or people who are interested in getting involved volunteer wise. Also how to talk to our people in government that really are making these decisions. This has been a very enlightening, actionable conversation. So I'd love for people to know where they can find you. And then if you'll hang around, we'll ask you a question for our Patreon supporters too. But let people know where they can find you and your writing and your book.
Sure. So I am for now on Twitter and
Yeah.
Instagram. And my handle is at _ Karen J. Gonzalez. I also have a website, Karen-Gonzalez.com. And there's a link to my Substack newsletter there. And you can find my book wherever books are sold. If you prefer not to buy from Jeff Bezos,
Yeah.
you don't have to.
Yeah.
It's found Barnes and Noble, bookshop, anywhere that you buy books, you can order it. So, and it's called Beyond Welcome, Centering Immigrants in Our Christian Response to Immigration.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation. I do hope that we learn to center immigrants better because of the book that you've written and the actionable steps that we can take. And even just this conversation, I hope has really helped people around the world that are listening. I know people in Australia and the UK, and this is a conversation happening in a lot of places. So thank you for that. And we will stick around and talk to our Patreon supporters. But thanks for being on the show today, Karen.
Thanks.
It was so great to have Karen Gonzalez back on the show. She did stick around for us to talk on Patreon. And so I hope that you will listen to her there in the conversation that we had about her childhood perspective on what it means to be a refugee, an asylum seeker, an immigrant in the United States today, based on her own childhood experience of coming to the U.S. from Guatemala and the things she experienced there as a child. So do check it out on our patreon.com/a world of difference. You can join for as little as $5 a month and have all the conversations that we've had with any of our guests that are available there, and then the future ones too. As Karen said, call your legislator if you have any concerns around immigration around you here in the United States, or if you're an expat abroad. She recommends the American Immigration Council to learn more about all these things. And you can also find her on her socials at Karen Gonzalez. We're going to link all of that in the show notes so that you can find her and her latest book and her previous book, The God Who Sees, that we talked about before as well, and just her writing and even her podcast that she's involved with. She's doing a lot of great things, a lot of great work, a thought leader, a theologian, a person who's had so much practical experience in the field helping resettle refugees, but also having been one herself, being multilingual, being bicultural, and we have so much to learn from her. I've learned a lot from her, and I hope you check her out in terms of the content she's putting out there. Her thought leadership is very, very valuable, especially at a time like this where we're having a lot of these kind of conversations around how to make a difference together and how to live in these lands around the world where we live with all these different cultures, and how we can make space at the table for everyone, and how that makes us better, because no one person has it all figured out. I always say great minds actually don't think alike. And that's a really good thing. We can learn so much from great minds with different perspectives and help us see something we haven't seen before. So I hope that's happened for you today, and that you continue to learn from her and seeing things that you haven't seen before from her perspective. And just the people she brings around her too, and those perspectives as well, are just super valuable. So excited to have her on today. It's been such a blessing. And once again, check her out on the Patreon conversation that we had, because that was super interesting too. We got to get a little insight into what it was like for her as a child and how that affects her perspective today, which undoubtedly it would. All of our childhood experiences help form how we see the world. And an experience like that she had is just so important for us to listen to as these children grow up into adults and can help us see in a different way. So thank you everyone for all the great work you're doing all around the world. Thank you to all of you who actually did vote here in the US and abroad for our election, and we're still getting some results rolled out. But yeah, it makes a difference. We want to be involved in justice work of any kind. Voting, if you live in a place where you can work, is one of the many ways we can help change systems that are unjust for all kinds of people. And it's one thing to help the wounded downstream and continually help individuals that are being hurt by a system. But if you go upstream and help the system be better, then it just helps so many more people, and it prevents it from happening. And so that's one thing we can do when we vote, to help change systems. It's just one thing, but it does help. So each of you who did, thank you for being a part of our society in that way, and for letting your voice and your perspective be heard. And in the meantime, wherever you are in the world, keep making a difference and letting us know how you're doing that. We love to hear about it. I do, and it helps me be better and gives me more innovation and creative ideas. So thanks for interacting with our posts on Instagram and Facebook and in our Facebook page. We've had a little trouble with our Facebook page today. If you've tried to go there, you may have had a little trouble. Facebook's causing some issues. I don't know if it's because of the layoffs here in Silicon Valley at Facebook recently or what, but if you've had a little trouble accessing the Facebook page, it's because there's little things going on with it right now. But Instagram should be working fine, and our Facebook group for A World of Difference podcast community, if you want to join our group, we have some conversations going on there, and that seems to be working fine. Also, you can join us on Twitter for any conversation around any of these episodes. We'd love to hear from you. And it's all the different great minds out there that help us make a difference together wherever we are. Thanks for listening and for engaging in these episodes. And also just very excited to announce that this week on Spotify, we were in the top 4% of podcast visibility. And so that was because of you. Thank you for all of that. When you've shared the podcast with others or given us reviews or any of it, it's helping other people join this conversation. And the more diverse voices we have speaking into this and listening and engaging, the better we all are. The better decisions we're making, the better we're reaching our communities, and the better we're making a difference. So the more of you that engage, the better this community is. So I really enjoy the different perspectives that are coming in, and it really enriches my life and helps me see things in my own community differently. So thank you. And in the meantime, whatever your next week holds, I hope that you find some time to rest and take care of yourself, because I know for sure all of you out there making a difference can get tired, because I know I've heard your stories and I've experienced it too. So take care of yourself and give your body the rest it needs, the nutrition it needs, the sunshine, all the things, so that you can be thriving and flourishing wherever you are, because other people matter that you're making a difference for, but you also matter. And we just want to make sure you know that. And it's okay to take breaks sometimes. We need that. We should. It's part of being human. So give yourself that grace and that self-compassion. And if you have any tips and tricks on that, please share them on our socials. We'd love to hear how that's going for you. And in the meantime, thank you for listening and making a difference wherever you are. Take care, and we'll talk next week. Bye. As we're finishing this episode, if you're thinking, I really wish I could learn more or go a little bit deeper, well, that's what our Difference Maker community is for. I would love to welcome you in to join the rest of us there. Once again, it's only $5 a month to join, the price of a latte at your local coffee shop. You can join at our Changers tier. Difference Makers is a community that really means so much to me. It's very special because each time I have a guest on the show, I record something outside of what we give to just the regular podcast audience, where we go a little bit deeper, and then I post those video episodes in this community and we can discuss them. But also at the very beginning tier, which is our Changers tier of this community, you'll get exclusive voting power and help pick podcast topics that give us, more of what we want from your perspective. You'll have access to exclusive 30 plus mini-sodes that aren't out there for the general public. And you'll get every month an exclusive monthly bonus mini-sode. At our Groundbreakers level, which is $10 a month, you can join and get all of that, but also priority access to submit questions to the podcast. And you'll get an additional 2 exclusive monthly bonus mini-sodes. And at our Trailblazers tier, which is $15 a month, the price of 3 lattes a month, you can get all of that, plus also 3 exclusive monthly bonus minisodes, and a patron shout out. So I would love for you to join us at any of those tiers. It'll help you come into this community, be in the midst of all of us, other difference makers, and we'd love to hear your perspective. I certainly would. It's a place to engage more with me and the audience around what you like, what you're resonating with, and once again, go deeper with each of our guests. So please join us in this membership community. I would love to hear your perspective and love to share this extra content with you. So show up at patreon.com/a world of difference.